Let's sit tall. Close the eyes. Arrive in this moment, at this time, in this place. Allow yourself to be awareness. To be awareness. Allow every fiber of your being to come alive with awareness. Be aware of everything and nothing. Let everything move through freely. Grasp onto nothing. Hold nothing. Just be the witness of everything that is moving through in this moment. Take a nice breath in and a nice breath out. And if it's available to you, feel a bit of reconciliation within yourself, body, mind, spirit, even just the littlest bit. And allow that to bring an even greater relief. And drawing the hands together in front of the heart. As we chant this beautiful sound, this beautiful vibration, Om, let all other resistance and barriers fall away and simply be the sound. Taking a breath in. Bow the head toward the heart, acknowledging all that is, and then draw the face to center and release the hands. So we have a little bit of a mixed group today. We have our weekly students and then we have our retreat attendees. And I'm going to repeat a little story that I told the retreat attendees maybe yesterday. I don't know, time flies, doesn't it? I don't know what day it is. So back in the early days of teaching YTT, I had come up with this, manual and teaching everything that I had been taught and had everything scheduled out. And one of the things that we did was, we gave the students weekly quizzes, maybe once or twice a week. And in that first week, a student came up to me at the end of the class and said, "Did I really do that badly? I thought I did well." And I said, What do you mean? You did wonderfully. What's the matter? So, well, what was the scale? Because if I did wonderfully, why did I get a 30? And I looked at her and I said, "It's not a 30, it's an Om." And she went, "Oh." And in that moment, I realized that no matter how long a student has been practicing, there's actually a large number of students who have no idea what Om is. No idea the literature about it. No idea what it represents. And so moving forward from that time, now we teach Om first. Have to. So I'd like to read to you a very short Upanishad called the Mandukya Upanishad. The Upanishads are a series of scriptures that are written in a way that make them much more easy to understand in comparison to, say, the Vedas, which are a bit more difficult, actually much more difficult. And according to some, there are 108 of these. There are really literally many more than that, but there are some primary ones, and this one is considered primary. It's one of the primary Upanishads because It explains to us in very simple terms the meaning of the vibration Om. The English translation by Eknatheshwaran. Om stands for the supreme reality. It is a symbol for what was, what is, and what shall be. Om represents also what lies beyond the past, the present, and the future. Brahman is all, and the self is Brahman. This self has 4 states of consciousness. The first is called Vaishvanara, in which one lives with all the senses turned outward, aware only of the external world. Tejasa is the name of the second, the dreaming state, in which, with the senses turned inward, one enacts the impressions of past deeds and present desires. The third state is called prajna. It's deep sleep, in which one neither dreams nor desires. There is no mind in prajna, but there is no separateness. There is no separateness. But the sleeper is not conscious of this. Let him become conscious in prajna, and it will open the door to the state of abiding joy. Prajna, all-powerful and all-knowing, dwells in the heart of all as the ruler. Prajna is the source and end of all. The fourth state is the superconscious state called turiya, neither inward nor outward, beyond the senses and the intellect, in which there is none other than the divine. The divine is the supreme goal of life. It is infinite peace and love. Realize that. Turiya is represented by Om. Though indivisible, it has 3 sounds. The A stands for Vaishnavara. Those who know this, through mastery of the senses, obtain the fruit of their desires and attain greatness. The U indicates Tejasa. Those who know this, by mastering even their dreams, become established in wisdom. In their family, everyone leads a spiritual life. The M corresponds with prajna. Those who know this, by stilling the mind, find their true stature and inspire everyone around them to grow. The mantra Om stands for the supreme state of turiya, without parts, beyond birth and death, symbol of everlasting joy. Those who know Om as the self become the self. Truly, they become the self. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. That's a lot. That little sound that you chant at the beginning of class or the end of class. It's not just a way to say hi or bring everybody onto the same page. Sure. But the reality of it is that it is an affirmation of the true nature of yourself. In that second verse, it states, this very self is Brahman. I am Atma Brahma. This very self is Brahman is one of the 4 Mahavakyas, one of the 4 great statements. And in some traditions, those statements vary a little bit. They might have 1 or 2 more. But basically, what is a Mahavakya is a very short statement that comes from the scriptures, comes from the Veda or the Upanishads, and it has a very clear meaning. This very self, not some other self, but in my life experience, this very self is Brahman. And it is nothing smaller than that. Your very self is Brahman and is nothing smaller than that. And it's said that if we chant the Mahavakya continually, that we come to understand the truth of that statement. This very self is Brahman. And what is Brahman? Brahman is the universal consciousness. Without form. Without form. It's It's that which brings forth everything, maintains everything, and dissolves everything. It is that everything else is reliant upon. It's also said that an individual who reads the Mandukya Upanishad, that there's a certain number of individuals who, that's the only one they need to read. If they read that Upanishad and they understand clearly what Om represents, and particularly that Mahavakya, because it really does explain the rest, this very self is Brahman, then they don't need to study anything else. They no longer need, because they no longer have questions. They no longer need to study because they no longer have doubts. They no longer need to study because they understand. They know. It's not a logical understanding, it's a knowing, a heartfelt knowing with no ands, ifs, or buts about it. For the ones who read the Mandukya Upanishad or hear the Mandukya Upanishad and still don't quite understand, it's said then that they will have to study either 12, I believe it's 1254 or 108 of the Upanishads. And truly, I think that probably 99.999% of us need to study all 108 of them, But who knows? Maybe that one person is in this room who heard those words and absolutely understood it, not logically, but in the very core of their being is like coming home again in such a strong fashion that there is no denying it. No denying it. There's no doubt. There's no, well, some days I'm really, really good. Some days I'm really, really bad. Some days I'm in between. There's none of that kind of banter in the mind. There's none of the, well, I've been practicing a really, really long time, so I should be understanding I'm Brahman. There's none of that's ego. There's none of this, I'm not good enough to be Brahman. That's also ego. None of that is present. For the individual who truly understands the words of the Mandukya Upanishad, the truth of it, there's no need for further words. Remember, we talked earlier in the training about words and how deceiving they can be. So Om. Om is verily the consciousness of the universe, doing what consciousness does, creating, maintaining, dissolving, being, embracing, releasing, with no personal preference, only with, I don't even know if we can call it creativity, because creativity is a human-made word that describes a particular thing, and we associate qualities to that. But I suppose for the purposes of today's talk, we can say, Om is the creative flow of the universe. But just because it's the creative flow of the universe, for those who romanticize that word and think that it means only things that are beautiful to us and inspiring to us, it can also be quite tragic to us and quite uninspiring to us. It includes everything. There is nothing that Om isn't. There is nothing that Om isn't. So everything from peace to war, everything from birth to death, everything is Brahman. And therefore everything is Om. And in the space of spiritual awareness, the understanding is that these oppositions of peace and war, of kindness and violence, of love and hate, are human-made oppositions, not divine-made oppositions. These are oppositions that have come about in our life because of our particular circumstances. They are not divinely made. And yet they are part of that consciousness because everything is. So people say, how can that be? How can that be? So then God is really angry? God is really mad? God doesn't really like me? No, it has nothing to do with that. God is impersonal. Divinity, Brahman, is impersonal. Brahman doesn't come up and pat you on the back and say, oh my gosh, you do so good. Well, maybe one Brahma does. But we're not talking about that one. Brahman, with the N at the end, that universal consciousness, isn't going to reward or punish you for anything. Because in the manifestation of the physical body, the human being, you were given a really special gift. And that gift is free will. Consciousness, universal consciousness. This may sound very esoteric for some, but hang on, it's okay, it's a good ride. That universal consciousness decided, or maybe it didn't, and that brings me to another scripture. Maybe I'll go to that in a moment. Decided, or maybe it didn't decide, it just happened, that suddenly there would be human beings and everything else that you see in the manifest world, universe. And that these human beings would be filled with this divine consciousness. But for some reason, we don't know it. We don't know. Maybe when we're a baby, we know. Maybe when we're a child, we have an inkling of remembering. But the older that we get, and I'm talking by 6 or 7, most definitely in our teen and adult years, we have no idea. We start searching. The billboard said, if I go get Gucci, The advertisement said, if I can go be a model. The teacher said, if I can go get a PhD. We start to go out grasping at all these things that are around us and outside of us. And in doing so, we forget what's inside of us. So that divine consciousness that is this being, that is the self, is concealed. We are also given this gift of free will so that the concealment wouldn't be forever. That we would have some kind of a choice. And the availability, the accessibility of that choice would depend on a lot of things. It depends on karma. Depends on personal karma, familial karma, community karma. Depends on past lives. Depends on so many things. Becomes a complicated web of how accessible remembrance of the divine consciousness that is the core makeup of our being is in this life. Free will is what prompts us to inquire. It's what prompts us to look deeper. Our free will. And free will is also a double-edged sword because it's a toy for the ego. It's like, I've got free will. I got all the free will in the world. I'll do whatever I want. I don't care what your dumb laws say. I don't care what those people say. I don't care what you think. I'm going to do what I want because I got free will. So the ego takes that free will, it manipulates it, turns it around into a weapon of mass proportions, a great conduit of violence. And the spirit, the self, the soul, sits patiently and says, someday you'll be tired of hurting yourself and others. And in that moment, you'll recognize what your free will is actually for. You'll recognize that your free will is meant for the rediscovery of the truth of the self and not the further forgetting of it. Does that make sense? So it's a struggle, right? It's a battle. It goes on inside of each and every one of us. And it's a horrific battle. All you have to do is look out at the world and you can tell, all the suffering that's out there. All the suffering that's right here. It's a horrific battle. But because of the circumstances and the consequences of divine manifestation, it is a battle that must be fought within each one of us. It is what we must face. And we will even face it in the same moment that we're turning away from it, when we deny it. When we say, no, I'm a victim of this world. There's nothing I can do about it. I can't remember myself. I can't be kind because, I've just been hurt too much. We're just digging a deeper hole, which is a complicated matter. But ultimately, in the long run, the deeper you dig, the closer you will actually get to the remembrance. In AA, they have a saying, right? You got to hit rock bottom before you come up. I would suggest to you that has a lot to do with everything human. We really have to dig ourselves a very, very deep hole before we finally decide that we're going to climb up out of it. So even if you're caught in the midst of a life that is full of poor decisions and fear and violence to self or to others by way of words or actions or thoughts even, the choice is there for you that your self-recovery will either be a short road or it will be a very long and tedious road. And it can be a long, tedious road. No one's going to judge you. Divinity doesn't judge. It has no thought on the subject. It just is. So the only one that your choice affects is you and potentially those around you who love you and try to support you. But ultimately it affects you. It affects you. So the ancient teachers understood this to some amazing degree, and that constantly blows my mind that some thousands and thousands of years ago, these teachers understood the human condition. They understood this immense battle that happens within. They understood the conceal, reveal, the forgetfulness, the recovery. They understood, and they went to great lengths to discover what it would take to, as it's stated in certain scriptures, cast aside this human form and recover the truth of the self. Know the Brahman as the self, without doubt and without reservation. And they went to some very great extents called austerities. Yeah. A lot of people aren't familiar with this either. They think that yoga's always pretty much been either standing on your head or Om, even if they're not really fully aware of what the Om means. They don't realize that in the deep past, and even today, if you go to India, you'll see the austerities were the commitment to the process of recovering the truth of the self through a process of denial of the world, the material world. So they would stand in tree pose for 3 months, or hang upside down from a tree branch, or hold the arm up until the fingers go numb and start to turn black and they lose all motion in the arm. Why would somebody do such a thing? Because you cannot overcome pain until you know what pain is. You cannot overcome limitations until you know the self-imposed nature of those limitations. And so they push themselves beyond what we can even begin to imagine, and they continue to, so that they could go beyond the fear, beyond the pain, and into a deeper, more profound truth of self. And that truth lies beyond pain. It lies in the essence of cosmic oneness, unity, which is really beyond our ability to understand. So they recognized, the battle. And they fought the battle. They fought the battle. And then they said, well, we have to look at this kind of practically, because not every human being is going to go to the extent where they're willing to hold their arm up for the rest of their life as it literally dies away. They're not. Most people aren't going to be willing to sit in meditation for a year. There's a gentleman, or I shouldn't say gentleman, there's a sage currently sitting under a tree in India. He's been there, I don't even know how long it is now. It's got to be years sitting there. They've had doctors come over and study him because, there's naysayers in the world, right? And they're like, no, there's no evidence he's eaten. There's no evidence that he's defecated. There's no evidence that he's done anything but sit here and breathe and be. And that's all. And he's so elevated away from the physicality of being that he is immersed in the truth of this self is Brahman. But we're not likely going to go sit there for a year and do the same thing. So we started at a practical level. Maybe we start with the asana, the physical practices. Maybe we start with the mantra. There are so many mantras. And you can collect mantras like you collect tchotchkes. It's true, right? It's true. Or you can chant one mantra. Om. And if you chant Om, then what you are continually saying to yourself at this divine conscious level, a level that your human mind may not completely understand, but your divine self is. It's an acknowledgement. It's an acknowledgement. This self is Brahman. This self is Brahman. This self is none other than Brahman. So all the stories go away. All the doubts and fears resolve. All the grasping and the desires. Give me that, give me that, give me that. I have to have that, but I have to have that. I gotta have that. Don't want that? There's no need for that. Because in the state of knowledge of the self, there is nothing lacking. Nothing. There's only wholeness. And whenever there is a concept that comes to the front of the mind of lacking, it's a human-made construct. It's a human-made construct that comes from our free will, because we have the free will to think whatever we want. And it is also resolved via our free will, because free will is what makes you sit down and chant Om, or whatever other mantra it is that you choose. So I oftentimes tell students, you don't need to become proficient in 10,000 mantras, in every posture. You don't need to read every scripture. Really, once you start reading many of them, you find out that most of them say the same thing, just using different words. What you need to do is become proficient in one. In one. But we like variety, so make it 7 or 8, maybe 9. It's a divine number, But don't go into the double digits, right? Because all that is distraction. It's like it breeds doubt in the mind, because the Bhagavad Gita says this, but the Upanishad says this, and how do I harmonize the two? And then another thing many students don't realize is that there are books called prakaranas, and those prakaranas tell you exactly how to harmonize the differences between particular scriptures. But the problem is that especially in the West, we don't know those books exist. We don't refer to them. We just say, whatever. I'll just go with what feels good. Our free will invites us to do so. Our free will says you can just go with what feels good, but that's not going to bring you closer to the truth of yourself. Just going with what feels good is actually often going to bring you deeper into suffering. So chant, and you enjoy chanting, then learn as many chants as you like, but have a sadhana practice. That's one chant. That's one mantra that you consistently go to every single day, over and over again, in both a disciplined seated practice and when you're standing online at the grocery store, driving your car, stuck in a traffic jam, getting aggravated over a coworker not doing their job. Have that one mantra that reins you in and that reminds you, my free will is a double-edged sword. Do I want to use my free will in a way that cuts me, hurts me and others? Or do I want to use my free will in a way that cuts away the waste, that cuts away the violence, that takes it away, that ends it, and that leaves the truth revealed? This self is Brahman. Om is also the name of God. A lot of students don't know that either. Om is the name of God. When you chant Om, you're calling, you're like, hey God, like yay God. Right? But you're not calling for something outside of yourself unless you are following a lineage that is dualistic in nature. What you're actually doing is calling from within yourself, recognizing that there's this battle that's going on between the ego wanting to be superior and the divinity that exists within you. And so chanting Om is saying, build up the awareness of the divinity and let the ego go to sleep for a little while. The ego is not going to go away. This is another really important thing to know. Your ego isn't going to just leave you magically and then suddenly you're going to be a happy, joyful person for the rest of your life with no problems. That's a fallacy. Boy, is that a rose-colored glasses perspective on spirituality. If anything, the battle gets bloody. It gets, right? It does. It's like, so you get a little taste in a moment and you're like, holy cow. Like, there really is some peace there. There really is something there. And then the ego says, hold it a second, sister. No. We will not be having this because there's no place for me there. There's no place for who I think I am. There's no place for my stories and my pity parties and my whatever. There's no place for that. It all has to be left to the wayside. And the ego knows this because the ego is like the child who has broken away from the fold and doesn't want to go back, And it says, no, I'm independent. I don't need you. And it's like, but you are me, so stop being silly. Right? And it's like, just stop denying yourself. And all will be fine. I'm just going to kind of go down, I guess, the list. I don't know if this is what's coming to my mind. Many of you know I don't prepare for this. I just sit with what it feels like is needed. We have this other saying in spirituality, which is so convoluted. Everything is as it should be. I don't know. That needs more explanation, because on the one hand, it's saying, that means that all the unnecessary tension in your body, that means that all the violence in the world, that means that all this is somehow okay. And that's a real lofty kind of a spiritual conversation because the reality is on the level of suffering that your typical human being lives at, it's not okay. It's not. That's a dismissive statement. Everything is as it should be. The way it's used, I'll say, is a dismissive statement. What it actually means, everything is exactly as it should be. Maybe there could be a rider added on to the end of that says, everything is exactly as it should be because you've all misused your free will. You're all responsible, every one of you. But it'll serve a purpose because eventually you'll get tired of suffering. You'll get tired of seeing the suffering and you'll look for a different way. You'll look for a way to come home to yourself. After all, this self is none other than Brahman. But you're listening to the stories of the ego, which is over here saying, I'm separate and I don't need you. And as long as you listen to that and not this, then we find ourselves where we find ourselves. Yeah. So everything is as it should be. But then there really is this kind of loftier ideal that goes along with that too. But you can't feed this to a new student of spirituality and expect them to understand. Everything is as it is meant to be. If you look out at nature, you see that nature has storms, right? Alaska just got pummeled, right? Yeah, huge storm up in Alaska. Lots of flooding on the coastline and whatnot. Really something. Puerto Rico is expecting to get hit with another one. Is nature doing that on purpose? No, of course not. Is she targeting certain areas and being like, I'm going to get you? No, of course not. It's just part of the process of the chaos unfolding and refolding and unfolding and refolding. It's the creative process of nature that sometimes the peace is exposed, the peace, the calm sea, as we talked about earlier today. And sometimes the waves emerge. And that's where we are, because we are nature in this physical human embodiment. So sometimes there will be peace, and sometimes there will be chaos. And as a natural unfolding of nature, of Shakti, that brings a whole nother level into it, but anyway, as that natural unfolding, everything is exactly as it's supposed to be. It is. But in that statement, don't ever allow yourself to forget that in the midst of the unfolding and the refolding of that chaos, you have free will. You can either use that as a weapon against yourself and others, or you can see it as part of your dharma to walk through it, to support those in need, to work and serve to the end of suffering, to the recognition of unity, and to the dissolution of the ideas of separation. You can see this constantly moving chaos as the space within which you fulfill your dharma. And it's so much easier to do that to any degree, a little tiny bit or a whole lot, if you have an anchor. And the anchor that stops you from being whisked away with those waves is Om. Om. Chant it every day. Sit down with a mala, chant it 108 times, and then chant it 108 times again. And every time you feel that wave is getting closer to you and you start feeling fear or anger or trepidation, or you start feeling like you're grasping at things and there's passion and desire and lust and greed, start chanting. Because in chanting Om, you are reminding yourself, this self is Brahman. The self is not the stories of lack, of want. No, the self is whole and complete. And this human experience, whatever it brings to me, is part of that completeness, no matter what it brings to me. Does that make sense? So I'm joined here by some very wonderful and amazing teachers. And so I'm going to ask each one of them if they would like to contribute to anything that I've said. And Gita, I will go to you first.
I was just thinking of, the free will, a different way that I put it is also you have your free will, your response, your reaction to whatever it is. It is as it's supposed to be or whatever. Yeah, you have that choice to be in the suffering or, that choice to not suffer from whatever it is. So that's one way that I look at it. Okay, it may be as it should be. But am I getting that lesson? Am I creating that reaction? Am I moving forward? Am I sitting still? So that's another way that I look at that, because, it seems really hard to accept that there is suffering. But that pain in your shoulder, how are you reacting to it? Or that suffering you're having, that's where the free will also comes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree 100%. Because we're so concealed, the heart, the Atman of the self, the Brahman that's within is so very deeply concealed. It's almost as if you could say life is giving us every opportunity to do the work. Every opportunity. And it's not always a sweet little flowery invitation. Sometimes it's a fire and a sword. Yeah. And it's like, so now, you've got a broken shoulder, you've got a broken knee, you've got a relationship that's on the rocks. What will you do with this? Will you use it to bury yourself a little deeper, or will you take this opportunity to discover a little bit more about the truth of yourself? Yeah. Jyotima.
One thing you taught me was Aham Brahma Asmi. I was reading actually from the Upanishads yesterday during and we start off with that one. And then there's this beautiful also story of the student who wants to go to a guru and become their student. And the student realizes they don't have a last name. And so they go to their mother and they say, what is my last name? And the mother said that, she spent her life as a servant. And she goes, now I don't know who your father is, but you can take my name. Your name could be, Jambala, or take my name, Jambala. And so the boy then goes to the guru and he tells the story of his name, and he doesn't know who his father is, but he's using his mother's name. And because of that, the guru says, yes, I'll take you, because the student came in humbly. He didn't invent his own last name, and he didn't try to create a story of who he was. He just presented in this raw who he was. And the guru then sent him off with a bunch of sick cows into the forest, and he said, take care of them. And so, and then he goes on, because in the story then the cows teach him a part of what Brahma means, and the cow sent him off to fire, and fire teaches him what Brahma means, and the fire sends him to swans. And so we were talking yesterday about how in order to begin to comprehend in our culture, we have to step back from our own preconceived ideas of who we are and how we view life, so that we can understand that when we go to take care of cows and the cows suddenly talk to us, that they are no different than us. So, we were saying how, you could go to a gorilla and I could say to you, well, that gorilla is equivalent to who you are. It is no more Brahman and no less Brahman. And you might be able to make that mental leap because it looks a little like you, right? It's part of the ape family. And then I tell you to look at a cow, and that cow is no more Brahman than you and no more less than you. And depending on your diet, you might or may not believe it. And then I tell you to go to those lanternflies and look at a lanternfly, and that lanternfly is no more or no less Brahman than you are. And then go to the soil and the dirt and a rock and a tree. And then once you start to see that, then you are seeing Om everywhere. You are seeing God everywhere. And then you start to live Om in a sense, because you recognize that it was I'm trying to think, Nirmalanda Devi.
Mm-hmm.
We did a podcast with her. And
So
she was a devotee of Swami Shraddhananda Saraswati.
Nishala Devi.
Nishala Devi,
Yeah.
thank you. And she was a Swami herself.
She was for a while.
And she told this beautiful story on the podcast of how when she watched Swami Satchidanandaji walk in the grass never bent over. The grass always stayed up. And she asked him about how is he doing that. And he said when he walks on the grass, he knows that he is walking on the breast of the Divine Mother. And so think about if every step you took, you acknowledged that you are walking on God with God. Everything that you breathe in, everything that you take. That to me is representation of home. I love that story in the Upanishads.
So beautiful. So beautiful. Nishala was one of my teachers. Such a divine being. Nishala Devi. Nishala Joy Devi. And imagine that for a moment. Just imagine that you're walking through a meadow. What would it take so that each step you took didn't bend a blade of grass in such a way that it was broken? Like, what would you have to have faith in about yourself? What would you have to know? And I'm going to stay away from the word believe. Right? But what would you have to know about yourself? Really know in order to walk that way. Not only across grass, but the next time a mosquito lands on you. The next time a bee buzzes in your face. The next time that there's a tick on you. The next time you see a snake in the hallway. We had a snake in the hallway yesterday. Oh, she was so cute. Her little beady eyes. What would you have to know about yourself? What would you have to know about yourself to love your enemy? Ooh. What would you have to know about yourself? What would you have to know about yourself? Really know in order to also know that your enemy is also Brahman. That the human being that you identify as your arch nemesis in this life is also Brahman. What kind of a war is that? Yeah. Shambhuji?
In your discussion of the Upanishad that led to your talk about the human ego, I was chuckling at the voice you were giving the ego because I hear that story. As a teacher, often students will come with questions, and if they come to my home or if they watch me as I behave in situations like this, and I'll bow to the deities, and if you've been paying attention, I've been bowing to swamini every chance I get. And students will say, well, that's okay for you, but I don't need a guru. It's okay for you because you look like that, but I'm different. I don't need someone telling me what to do. I say, okay, that's fine. Everybody has a different path. And then about a half breath later, they say, you know, my hip hurts. What should I do? What should I eat? My spouse is driving me crazy. How are you so calm? How do you get that way? And in Scripture, we always talk about that the macrocosm and the microcosm are the same. Your internal environment is reflected in your external environment, and the external environment is reflected in your internal environment. And so we will get into those of you that are participating in the weekend in the next session after brunch, when forget all of the things that we're going to talk about.
Just everything.
But lineages is one of them, and I will be talking about the differentiations between lineages. And I'll say it again, I am not a formal part of this lineage, and that doesn't matter to me. And it doesn't matter to Swamini Ji. I will never not bow as if she were my Sadguru. Because to sit in a position and to lead, you have to divest yourself of ego. I mean, years ago, Swamini Ji could have kicked me when I would go to touch her feet, but she didn't, and she accepted it, knowing full well that I wasn't doing it to ingratiate myself to her or the lineage, but that whoever sits in that space, whatever mantra we're doing becomes my new favorite. It's not a matter of preference. It's a matter of, and here, what else do I have to do but bow? What else do I have to do but cry? You asked how asana was, even though you were there. I don't know how good your eyesight is. Half the time, my face was covered in tears. Tears of joy, tears of sadness, just tears. No shame, no guilt associated with it. And when we get to Om, and all of the things that it brings up, and all-encompassing, like to even sit as Westerners and try and describe to other Westerners, what is Om? Oh, it's just everything.
Just.
It's just the roadmap of the universe and entire creation. Every emotion that you can imagine, all at once. Every thought. Your thoughts, everyone's thoughts. The entire creation of history. How do you describe that? We haven't even come close. Even in the symbology of the Devanagari, Hindu iconography is the most complicated, beautiful of all of the forms of iconography. Om itself in Devanagari is the map. Everything means something. And nothing means anything.
It's so true. So many things that you've said, Shambhuji, and that you've all said. And we had a beautiful visitor yesterday, my Anati, Devi. Anati means little sister. And she calls me Chechi, which means big sister. And we've known each other for a while, and I just adore her. And we were talking about our gurus, and about how part of the guru responsibility is to support you in understanding humility, and not in a harmful way, but in a way where you accept that. You accept that this is a necessary step in my evolution as a human being, because if I don't have humility, then what do I have? Obviously, it's opposite, which is pride. And there's nothing wrong with pride unless it's weaponized. And I would suggest to you that most times it's weaponized. 99% of the time it's weaponized against one's own self, as well as against other beings. So the free will becomes, well, I've been really adhering to pride for my whole life so far, and here is this being who is teaching me about humility. How has the pride been working for me? And maybe it's time to try something a little new. So, and there's so much more to it than that, but so Swamiji would come and visit us every year, and this one year when he came here, there was a whole building full of people back pre-COVID. Swamiji has passed on now. He died of COVID, actually, Mahasamadhi'd, and he's still here so very much. But he walked in the door, and I was just so happy to see him, and I bowed down and I touched his feet, and he smacked me on the back. Woke up that Shakti. And I got up, and someone who I know fairly well came over and said, "How can you do that? Like, I thought you were like this strong, independent woman. How could you like bow down and touch the feet of a man?" And I looked at her and I said, "Therein lies the issue, huh? Because you look at him and you see a man. I look at him and I see God. I look at him and I see God. I look at you and I see God. I don't see people, little people, No, there's God there. And I wish to know God. And therefore, I must remove the obstacles to that knowing. And one of the primary obstacles is my own pride. So I will be humble. Even when other women look at it and say, "How could you?" I'm not bowing down to him because I'm less than he is. I'm not bowing down to him because like I'm putting some man on a pedestal. There's no way. But God is everything. So I will bow down and touch all of your feet. And Shambhu didn't tell you that part, that oftentimes when he does that, I'll do the same thing to him, and then he'll turn a little red. And it's very sweet and see. Yeah. But this is the way that we overcome our pride, right? This is the way we overcome our pride, because I'm not naive. I look back at my life and I oftentimes think, how did I get here? Doing these things, having this opportunity, like this is a grace, and it's not one that I wish to abuse. So even as students call me their teacher, even as they choose their own ways to describe me, I will bow down and touch their feet, because none of us will be on a pedestal. We're in this together. In this together. This self is verily Brahman. So is yours. And therefore we're one. And this is the concept of oneness, which makes a great slogan on a t-shirt. But if you allow yourself to go just a little bit deeper than that, then what you'll find is that when we say oneness, what we're actually saying is we are all verily Brahman. So we may have shown up in a little different form. We may even argue in this lifetime. We may have differences that are very, very significant. But underneath all of that ego play, underneath all of that free will to forget, there is the consciousness to be remembered. Any questions or reflections?
I failed my test last night.
You failed your test?
I heard all the stories about not being less than. It was dark. I went to get in bed. Had my phone on for my light. And something scuttled across my blanket. Whoopee!
What was it?
Well, to my horror, the only thing that I hate more than a cockroach is a centipede.
Oh.
Yes. And I know sometimes.
Oh, thank goodness. Breathe.
And then oh no, if it had been a lizard, a snake, a mouse, a rat, a cat, anything, I'm fine with all of that. I cannot deal with cockroaches till I got to India. They're very big and they have a lot of attitude. You cannot push them around the room. You crouch down, and they look at you like, I've been here for a long time. And you just showed up for a couple of days. Don't tell me where I can go and where I can't go. So I learned to have a truce with all the cockroaches. But the centipede, I'm terrified of centipedes.
Was it the long-legged kind?
Oh, all the million fuzzy ones?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the first reaction was absolute disgust, fear, and horror.
Oh.
Thankfully, some part of your teachings got there, and I said, with your support, do not kill this thing. I had my sliver in my hand.
Oh.
And it was in just a way because I really wanted to, but I knew not to. So because I did not think of Brahma at that moment, but I could sweep them off the bed. And then I had to go through the rest of the night wondering where he was, swearing that he was going to come back in the bed. I think one time, other than this is a living being and I know there's a benefit, there's a reason that I should not be killing. He's eating the other bugs or he's lost and he's as terrified of me with the shoe in my hand that I am of him or her. But I did not once think that this is equivalent to me. This is another form of life. And I heard you discuss the ticks. But in that moment, it didn't cross my mind. All I remember now is the horror of seeing him doing his thing. He was just running,
But good for you for stopping.
I had a lot of support.
No. And
was there telling me, don't kill him.
it was that grace. It was, Brahman speaking to Brahman about Brahman. And so when the next time that you see one of those fuzzy little centipedes, you just go, and you too verily are Brahman over there. Yeah, absolutely. Oh.
Yogi Desai would say, and it still says, your first reaction is free. If you use it to be free. But every reaction that comes from that first reaction are the karmic consequences. So if you sat there and felt guilty about feeling scared,
No, I didn't.
and then feeling shame about feeling guilty about feeling scared,
No, that was
and then
it's just fear.
your first reaction is free.
So, first I felt disgust. I don't know why, because I think bugs are dirty. And they're not really, but then I felt fear. So what are the karmic consequences for those two things?
You didn't react to the reactions.
You had a willingness in you. So some people would look and have that disgust and then shh, right? But you had the disgust and somewhere in you there was a thought. There's got to be a different way to feel. Now, Leslie recognized what was going on, and either she came to you or you asked her. But in that process, your free will, you chose the side of the free will that negated the fear, that negated the disgust, even if it was still there. And the thing that we also have to remember is that all action is karma. And it's very difficult to say, if not impossible, about so what are the positive repercussion versus negative repercussions of any karma? It's very hard to say that. But basically, did you feel some kind of relief from the disgust as you made the decision to move it out of your way and let it go?
I did feel guilt. No, I felt really bad. I thought, if it was refocused me, felt bad that I had thought of him as dirty and disgusting, and it's just a little creature.
And maybe next time you won't then. Because the last time that you had this encounter, perhaps that thought never even entered your mind, that how could I think that that's a disgusting little being?
Yeah.
So the thought process is evolving, and the karma associated with that evolution is a broader perspective concerning other beings as well as yourself. Maybe this isn't the whole story. Maybe this initial thought, this impulse is not all there is. And so the karma there could be that the consequence, I should say, of the karma there is that maybe as this continues on, you open yourself up to even broader thinking, seeing more of the big picture, until the day comes where you just look and say, "Hi, Brahman." Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah. It's so true, though, and Yogi decides, his words are so true. Everything is karma. Everything is karma. Batting your eyelashes is karma. There's a consequence to it. Sometimes a little eyelash hair falls in your eye. Oh, that's the worst karma. And sometimes it takes a little bit of a fluff out of your eye, and that's like the best karma. So how do you know which one it's going to be? Right? Sometimes we do know, though. Sometimes we do know. And so if you made it your life's purpose to kill every centipede, right? You know what that's going to do. On some level of yourself, you know. If you make it your life's purpose to alleviate the suffering of every centipede, on some level of your person, you know what that will bring too. Yeah. I'd go on, I'll stop there. Any other questions or reflections? Thank you for sharing that.
It gets complicated with mosquitoes and ticks.
Oh, yes it does. Swami Shivananda was sitting in satsang, and in India, where, mosquitoes are an issue, right? And as he's sitting, he's got attendants who bring him water and whatever he needs and fan him. Yeah, exactly. He died the year I was born. He died in 1963. And so he's sitting there, and a mosquito landed on his bare arm, and the attendant came over to shoo it away, and Swami Shivananda said, "Leave her alone. She's only doing that because she's going to have babies. Let her feed. She'll be fine." He said, "But Swamiji." And he's like, "No. What do you have to let go of? What constriction, what knots, what beliefs, what stories in order to, in India, welcome the mosquito?" It's a complicated matter for sure. It sure is. I'm not suggesting that, you go to India and let the mosquito sit on you and feed, but I don't know, There's birth, there's maintenance, and there's death. And none of us will escape any of those. It just won't happen. We will all be born, we will all be maintained, and we will all perish in this physical body. But the soul will live on and on and on. And the soul will have many bodies, just like you have many sweaters in your closet. The soul will have many, many bodies. That's another conversation. All right, let's sit tall. We'll close the eyes. Take a breath in, take a breath out. Bring to the front of your mind a visualization of some little critter that makes you uncomfortable. Maybe for some it's a centipede. Maybe for others it's a spider. Maybe for some it's a person. Bring that to your mind. And say, even with resistance, you too, verily and completely are Brahman. This self is Brahman. yourself is Brahman. We are all Brahman. And draw the hands together in front of the heart. And we'll lift our voices in one Om. Take a breath in. Jai Mata Di, Om Namah Shivaya, Hare Krishna, Hare Om. Thank you all so much for being here today. So wonderful to gather with each and every one of you. I had a student one time who said, "Why do you look at us?" Well, it's not to intimidate you. It's because that's how we connect. We look at each other. Let us all know we're seen. Let us all know we're seen. Yeah. So enjoy your lunch if you haven't had some already. Make sure that you send some love to those in the kitchen. They work so hard to bring delicious food to the community. They really do. And then the retreat attendees, I'm sure that you know where you'll be next. So, and at what time. Otherwise, you can ask your beloved presenters. Yeah. Wonderful.
So I think we're back in this room.
Back in this room?
Oh, wait. Yeah, I know, right?
Durga's Garden?
Yeah, 1 o'clock, Durga's Garden. 1 o'clock.
Durga's Garden.
Okay.
Durga's Garden.
Someone wasn't just just by chance.
Centipedes.
I had encounters with centipedes all day today.
Oh, that's a good question.
There was
We
one
can-
when
Yeah.
we landed here.